Hey, what's up? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Gabby and today I'm going to be doing my September wrap up. And the month of September was kind of a shit show for me because my reading was just all over the place. I mean, I did manage to read 15 books, but I DNF'd so many books this month, I thought I was going insane. Because right at the start of the month, I was trying to read Lisi's story and I got 60 pages into it before I was kind of bored, so I set it aside. And then I was trying to do a reading books outside of my comfort zone video this month when I picked up Dune and The Book Thief. I got a little over 100 pages into The Book Thief before I decided this is really not my thing and it was putting me in a reading slump. And then same with Dune, I got 130 pages into Dune before I just decided this is also not my thing and I just can't get through it. It was so boring. And then it got to the point where I was just DNFing books that are in my comfort zone that I was really excited about. Like I DNF'd The Family Plot, I DNF'd Where the Truth Lies, I DNF'd Yes Daddy, Night Bitch, The Other Me, and Never Saw Me Coming. And so I don't know if it's just me right now, if I just can't seem to... I don't know what's going on, but I feel like with these thrillers that I've been so excited about, I'm probably going to come back to them at a later time when I'm not dealing with whatever is like blocking me from wanting to read right now. But with that being said, let's discuss the 15 books that I did read this month, even though there were some DNFs in this pile too. Oof! So the first book that I read this month was The Heart Principle by Helen Huang, and this book is a romance novel that I was highly anticipating, and I was really excited because this is the third book in Helen Huang's romance trilogy with The Kiss Quotient. This book was really beautiful, but it was honestly a lot more sad and depressing than I was anticipating it to be, because the other two books in the series are pretty, you know, lighthearted, fun romance books, but this one is really sad, like really triggering, honestly, really depressing, and it was just not what I was signing up to read at that time, because I actually picked up this book at the start of the month because I was going through some really hard things at the start of this month, and so I wanted something that would be like a light pick-me-up to take my mind off of things, and that is not at all what I got with this book, so I was not expecting to cry as hard as I did when I read this book. And I will just warn you that this book is sad, okay? It's sad as fuck, and if you're not prepared to read something like this right now, then I would set this one aside, because even though I do think this is an absolutely gorgeous story, and I still gave it 4 stars, like it's still one of my favorite romance novels, I will warn you that it's freaking sad, and I was not expecting it to be that sad, and so it kind of took me off guard for that reason. But nonetheless, I still really enjoyed this book. I really loved the couple. We're following Anna and Quan in this book, and Quan was one of my favorite male characters in this like book series, so I was really looking forward to finally getting his story in this book. And this book, it's a really great romance. The romance is really cute, but this is much more a coming of age story for Anna's character as opposed to a romance. Like there's not, like the romance is not the center of the story. It's really more about Anna and her coming of age story and her figuring out who she is and finding her voice. And it also involves some really hard family topics and tragedies and things like that. The next book I read this month is We Are the Brennans, and this one is a kind of like literary fiction, contemporary fiction story about this family who one of the siblings had like moved to Los Angeles and gotten away from the family, but then she gets into a really bad car wreck and she has to come back home to live with all of her siblings and her family again. And it's kind of this like dramatic story about their family. I will be honest though that I don't know, I just didn't care that much, to be honest, about this book. Again, it might just be me, like I don't know what's going on with me this month, but I'm just like not caring a whole lot about any of the stories that I'm reading. I usually love family dramas in books, but for some reason I feel the same way about this one as I did with Malibu Rising. Like it's just very underwhelming for me. The ending was very anticlimactic, and I just didn't really connect with any of these characters in this book on a personal level. I feel like the first half of this book was really good, but then it quickly just got kind of like boring and repetitive for me, so I don't know, I ended up giving this one 3 stars because I didn't dislike it. It just was like fine. I don't know, it's very forgettable. The next book I read this month is Some Girls Do, and this is a young adult romance that I was really excited to read because it's a romance between these 2 girls, and one of them is a track star and the other one is like in beauty pageants and stuff. And this book, oh my god, I'm so upset with this book because I feel like the first half of this book was really freaking cute and really adorable. And then the second half of this book just really lost me. These characters just got to be so frustrating, and some of their decision making, I was just like, why are you doing this? And just like the way that they would talk to each other and the things that they would do to each other, it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way towards the end. And so I ended up giving it 2.5 stars for that reason. I just really wanted to love this because the first half of this book was so freaking cute and their banter was so like spot on. And I genuinely felt for both of these characters and their situations in the beginning. And then I read Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney. This is probably my favorite book that I read this month. This is one of the only 5 stars that I had this month. This book is Alice Feeney's latest thriller novel, and in this book we're following this married couple who they've been married for 10 years now, and they're feeling like they're falling out of love and like they might be getting divorced. So in order to save their marriage, they take this trip that they won in this little giveaway that's gonna be like going to this chapel that's out in the middle of nowhere, and it's snowing, and they're gonna be staying there for a few days. And while they're at this chapel, it's kind of spooky, like something's going on, like there's something creepy happening at this chapel. And the atmosphere in this book is just really great because of the snow. It feels very, you know, claustrophobic and isolated. And while this is going on, we do get alternate chapters where we see these letters that this girl has written to her husband over the last 10 years. So you kind of get to see what their relationship was like when it's good, and then leading up to how it became like what it is now. And I don't know, I really loved this thriller. There were so many good plot twists towards the end of this book. My jaw was just like on the floor for like the last 50 pages of this book. I just thought it was so well done. And this is definitely one of my favorite thrillers of the year, and for sure my favorite Alice Feeney book by far. And then next up, sadly, I have My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. This is actually a book that I DNF'd after 250 pages into it, but because I was a lot more than halfway through, I'm still counting this book towards my books for this month. And I'm sad that I didn't love this book because this is a new horror novel from Stephen Graham Jones. He's, you know, a pretty well-known horror author in the community. And this book should have been right up my alley, you know, because we're following this young girl named Jade who's 17 and she's obsessed with horror movies, and she's like convinced that her life is a horror movie. And I feel like at the start of this book, it was very intriguing. There was a very good opening scene that I just thought was so intense and so well done, but then it immediately gets so dull and like literally nothing happens for 250 pages. And the writing, I couldn't like understand a lot of the times what was even happening with the writing of this book. It was very hard to follow. And not only that, but I feel like this book relied too much on other horror movies and other well-known horror things to be interesting. I don't know, I ended up giving this one 2 stars, and I'm sad about it because I really wanted to love this. And then I read Ninth House, and this was actually the first book that I was attempting to read for the Reading Books Outside of My Comfort Zone video, and this is the only one that I ended up actually reading. This one is out of my comfort zone because it's an adult fantasy novel, but I didn't realize that this book would have so much like mystery and kind of paranormal aspects to it, so for those reasons it kind of was in my comfort zone, which I think is part of the reason why I was able to finish this book. But this book was actually pretty surprising. Like, I didn't hate it, which I'm surprised by because I expected not to really like this book going into it. I just ended up really loving the atmosphere in this book. I loved the, you know, college setting and the dark academia vibes and the atmosphere. That is something that I really crave at this time of year, so I really enjoyed it for that reason. I really liked the characters, and I really did enjoy a lot of the, you know, paranormal ghost type of things happening in this story. I thought that that was really interesting and really creepy at some parts. But I don't know, for the most part, I thought this book was just fine. Like, I don't see myself wanting to read the sequel because I do think this book is like way too long for what it is, also because the book is like 450 pages and only like 200 of those pages are interesting. So I feel like this book definitely could have been cut down a lot, but still, I'm surprised that I didn't dislike this one. I ended up giving it like 3 stars. And then I read the book Roommate by Serena Bowen. This was actually sent to me off my Amazon wishlist by my friend Hannah. So thank you so much, Hannah, for sending me this one. This book is just the kind of pick-me-up that I needed after, you know, feeling kind of disappointed by a lot of the stuff that I was reading this month. And at this point, I was like DNFing things left and right. And so it meant a lot that I was able to finish this book, you know, that says something for this book. But this one is this male-male romance, and we're following these 2 guys who are kind of down on their luck. But if you couldn't tell from the title, we have the roommate trope in this book, which I'm a huge fan of that trope in romance. I also really loved the cafe vibes in this book because both of the characters work at the same cafe. and so they go in the morning and, you know, like they make fresh pastries and bagels and pretzels and coffee and shit. It was just like, the vibe was really amazing. And I don't know, I have mixed feelings about this one because I ended up giving this one like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. It's not a new favorite for me, but I loved the first half of this book. I loved the tension between these two characters in the first half of the book, but by the second half of the book, there was like a lot of unnecessary drama that just kind of felt like drama for the sake of drama, and some of the characters were just doing some things that did not make sense to me. So, I mean, for that reason, I kind of like lowered my rating, but for the most part, I did really enjoy my experience reading this book. Next up was 56 Days. This was the BookTube book club pick of this month. And this book, oh my god, I don't know how I feel about this thriller, because if you didn't know, this is the one that involves COVID, because it involves these two people. What are their names? Sierra and Oliver. They meet like at the beginning of this book, right when COVID is starting to hit the Irish shores, and that was 56 days ago. And then 35 days ago, when the lockdown threatens to keep them apart, he suggests that they move in together. And then today, detectives arrive at his apartment to discover a decomposing body inside. And so this book, I feel very middle of the road about this book. I think I ended up giving it 3 stars. I wanted to love this so badly, but there were some things that I didn't really like about this book. And I will say, I thought the first half of this book was really, really great. I thought it was very immediately suspenseful and mysterious about like what happened to these people. It kind of like took me a minute to get used to the writing style though, not gonna lie, because it jumps back and forth to like 56 days ago, 35 days ago, this many days ago, this many days, and like the timeline in my brain was like, whoa, getting so confused. So once I started taking notes on it and actually figuring out the timeline, I was enjoying it a lot more. But I will say some of this book was so repetitive. I wasn't a huge fan of that writing style because I hated rereading some of the same scenes from the other character's point of view, because a lot of times in this book we'll get Sierra's point of view first and we'll read a scene that happened like 56 days ago, and then a little bit later on in the book we get the same scene but from the guy's point of view, so we just read the same dialogue over again and we get like his perspective on things. And I just didn't care enough about these characters in this book to be rereading the same scenes like over and over again. I just thought that that was really lame, and I didn't like that writing style at all. I do think that this book was a really great concept, and while there were a few twists that I was really on board with, for the most part I don't really know how I feel about them. Like, I feel pretty like okay about them, I guess. And then the next book I read was We Were Never Here. I actually just listened to this on audio from my library, and this is a pretty hyped thriller right now in the community. This one was actually really interesting. It was about these two girls who are best friends, and they went and traveled to like different countries in the world, and then it seems like everywhere they go there's trouble with this friend because these guys keep getting murdered, and she's claiming that it's like self-defense, but the best friend that's our main character is wondering like how many times can this actually happen to someone, or is she just like a killer? And it's really interesting because we only get the point of view of, you know, the protagonist, so we never get the point of view of the best friend in this book, which I think is really interesting because you never quite know what's going on in her head. And I just thought this book was like really fun. It was really short and easy to read, but unfortunately I ended up giving this one 3 stars, and the reason for that is because, as you might have guessed, the first half was really strong, and then the second half is where things started to get a little bit predictable and just like not as fun anymore. And I don't know, I just feel like this book had so much potential and the ending just wasn't my favorite. So yeah, I ended up giving this one 3 stars. And then the next book that I read this month was Chasing the Boogeyman by Richard Chismar, and this was also sent to me by my friend Hannah, so thank you so much to Hannah. This is a book that is really popular right now, I feel like, in the community. It's a horror novel that's written in a true crime style, but none of the events that, you know, are talked about in this book actually happened. But the thing that I think is the most confusing thing about this book is that the author himself is the protagonist in this book, and he's describing, from what I understand, is his real childhood experiences growing up in this small town in Maryland. And in this book, he's describing the murder of these 4 teenage girls in his small town that he grew up in Maryland, but none of these murders actually happened. So it's kind of confusing because this book is written like in a true crime style, but none of it is actually true except for the fact that the main character is the author himself. And he's using like real names of like his wife and like his, you know, friends, I'm assuming, in this book. And honestly, I don't know how I feel about this book, and I'm finding it hard to verbalize my feelings about this book because I just found the experience to be so strange, if I'm being honest. if I'm being honest, like, I don't see the reason why someone would want to write a book that's about like fictional murders of teenage girls, but it's like in your real hometown. And yet the main protagonist of this book is this like man who's writing about his teenagehood, and it's just, I don't know, the whole concept of this book is just very strange to me. I don't know, when I heard of this book and put this book on my TBR, I thought this was a true crime. Like, I thought this was real, and so my brain was just really confused by the fact that this actually wasn't real at all. But I do agree with the fact that a lot of other reviewers I've seen saying that this book is a 5-star idea with a 2-star plot, because I feel like a lot of this book was just so boring for me, especially that first chapter. Like, he just goes on and on and on about his childhood, and it's like not creepy at all. It's just about him, like, you know, playing baseball and like being a young boy in his town. And I feel like this book is as much about his small town and how it's like kind of a memoir for him in a way, just talking about his childhood. And then he also mentions these fictional murders that never happened. I also feel like the beginning of this book had a lot of really cool, like, creepy paranormal things mentioned that just never really went anywhere. And it feels like they were just mentioned just for the sake of having something cool and paranormal kind of happening in this book. But I was frustrated that those things that I thought were so cool that was keeping me interested in the book never actually went anywhere. And I don't know, I guess I'm just sad because I just don't personally really see the hype with this one. And as much as I wanted to love it, I just don't understand. I don't understand. And I think I ended up giving this one either a 3-star or like a 2.5-star. I just don't really know how I feel about this one, to be honest. And then the next 4 books that I read were all books that I read for my Reading Your Horror Recommendations reading vlog that I did. First book that I read for that is We Need to Do Something by Max Booth III, and this book was the most shocking favorite thing that I read in that video. This book is a novella, and it's basically just about this family who gets stuck in their bathroom during a tornado warning because there's a tornado warning in their area, and so they go to their bathroom for shelter, and then they get trapped in their bathroom, and this family is slowly like losing their minds. And that's basically what this book is about. This book was 5 stars for me. I absolutely loved it. This book was terrifying, it was gross, but it was everything that I love in horror, and it's very like psychological, you know, because these characters, it's like they're starting to question their own sanity. They don't know what's real, you don't know what's real as the reader. It's very ambiguous. I just loved it so much. It was amazing. It's like everything that I crave in a horror book. However, the next book that I read is No One Gets Out Alive by Adam Neville, and this is one that I actually DNF'd at 398 pages into this book, because this book is well over 600 pages, and because I had gotten so far into it, I'm still counting this as a book that I've read because I read so much of this book. And this book is about this woman named Stephanie who is very down on her luck and very broke, and she spends the last little bit of money she has on this deposit for this apartment in this creepy ass building. And then we get to follow her as she, you know, is staying in this building for a few nights, and this building is just, there's something going on here. It's terrifying, it's disturbing, it's weird. This is like one of the only horror books that I've ever read that I had to stop reading this because it got to be a little bit too much for me, and I've discovered certain things in horror that I really don't like reading about. And yeah, if you want to know more of my thoughts on the specifics, because I kind of really say specifically why I decided to DNF this book in my reading vlog of Reading Your Horror Recommendations, so I'll leave that link down below if you want to see more of an explanation on why I decided I will not read this anymore. But yeah, I ended up giving this like 2 stars. It was just not my thing. And then the next book I read for that video was Hide and Seeker. This one is a middle grade horror novel. This is the first, if not one of the first middle grade books that I've ever read. As interesting as this book was, you know, because this book took a turn on the like hide and seek children's game, and there was this like seeker that would come and get you if you broke the rules of hide and seek. It was a very interesting concept, and I honestly feel like if I was a young, you know, elementary schooler, if I was in middle school, I probably would have really loved this because I loved this kind of spooky shit when I was a young kid. But because I was an adult, I just felt like I was a little bit too old to be reading this. Like, I don't know, some of the things that were happening in this book just felt like they were, you know, targeted towards children, which of course it probably is because this is a middle grade book, so it's like, can I even really judge this book for these things? But overall, I just found it to be a little bit too like cheesy at times. I just wanted it to get a little bit more scary and dark, but I know this is a children's book, so it wasn't gonna do that. And so I ended up giving this book 3 stars. It was fine, it just like wasn't my favorite. And then the last book that I read for that video is The Invited by Jennifer McMahon. Jennifer McMahon is one of my favorite horror authors. This is the 4th book that I've read from her, and this book is a haunted house story with a twist, because instead of a couple moving into a haunted house, they decide to build one. And in this book, it had a really great spooky atmosphere. I really loved the character Olive in this book, who is this younger girl that was kind of a side character in this book. I really, really loved her, and she was definitely my favorite character in this. But I will say the main character of this book, Helen, she kind of drove me a little bit crazy at times. So for that reason alone, I ended up knocking down a star and it got a 4-star from me. But regardless, I still really, really love this book. I think Jennifer McMahon is such a great horror author because she really genuinely makes you care about the characters that she writes, which I think is so rare in horror novels. I still think The Winter People is her best book, but nonetheless, I still really enjoyed this one too. And then the last book that I read this month was a non-fiction book, and it was this book called Ace, What Asexuality Reveals About Desire, Society, and the Meaning of Sex. And this book was a very personal reading experience for me because if you didn't know, I do identify as asexual, and it's not something that I talk about like super often just because sexuality is such a confusing thing for me even still, and it's still something that I'm personally trying to navigate myself. But it's books like this that I truly appreciate because it really makes me feel more understood, you know, and more seen, and I never relate more to a book than when I read something about asexuality. And this is actually the first non-fiction book that I've ever read about asexuality, so that was especially interesting. Books like this are so important, you know, because a lot of people still don't even know what asexuality is, or it's not something that they understand very well. And so I think books like this that educate you on asexuality are super important. And this book also brought to my attention a lot of things that I've never personally considered, like how feminism ties into asexuality and how people will try to like use that against you almost, or try to like claim that you're anti-feminist because you're asexual. And also how people of color have a much harder time with asexuality because of the different perspectives on sex in different cultures and different races. It's just really, really fascinating. I also really love this quote from this model who is asexual because a lot of people said that they didn't think she was actually asexual because she's really attractive or because she's a model. And she had this quote in here when she says, "I like it when people give me attention. I like being interesting, and these are all things that our societal narrative attaches to sex. For allos, sex is so natural an explanation for behavior that other reasons, such as wanting to dress creatively for its own sake and wanting to be seen just to be seen, can be hard to fathom. I'm like, I want you to stare at me, but I don't want you to fuck me, and they have nothing to do with each other." And I was like, oh my god, I've never related more to that, because it's like, yes, I want to be, you know, given attention sometimes. Yes, I want to be interesting, and most of the time I want it for myself. But it's like, yeah, sometimes it can be nice to have the attention of someone else, but that doesn't mean I want to have sex with you. And I just think that this book was really eye-opening, even for me as somebody who identifies as asexual. So I feel like if you're wanting to learn more about asexuality and you don't know a whole lot about it, I think this would be a really informative and educational book for you. So that's why I think books like this are so important, you know, like representation matters, you know, representation is very important. And so for that reason alone, this book was a 5-star book. It was a very personal reading experience for me, and I really loved it, and I really appreciate this book. So yeah, those are all of the books that I read in the month of September. And as I said, this was a pretty struggle bus of a month for me. I know it definitely had to do with, you know, for a lot of the month of September, we didn't really know like what was going on with Tank's health, you know, with my dog and my sister's dog's health. And so I think that definitely affected my reading month for sure, and my ability to like focus and pay attention and care about what I was reading. And so I'm hoping moving into October, now that we know that Tank is cancer-free, which by the way, if you didn't know, I posted an update in my Instagram story that we did find out that Tank does not have cancer. The mass that they found just ended up being a bunch of like fatty cells, but it wasn't cancerous, which like, thank the freaking gods. But because of that, I feel like it definitely contributed to why I was struggling so much in September to read anything, because my brain was just like all over the place. But you know, hopefully moving into the month of October, this little like reading slump or whatever I had going on can just like fuck right off, because it's October now, and I'm so excited for all of the reading that I have planned in October. I have so much spooky content, so much spooky books that I would love to read. And so yeah, I'm very optimistic about, you know, going into October and hopefully being able to read and enjoy a lot more of what I read, hopefully. Yeah, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you've read any of these books, what your thoughts are on them. I'm sorry this video is probably not the best, but like my reading was all over the place, and I'm sorry to sound so negative all the time with all these books, but like it was just a bad reading month. It wasn't great for me. Thank you so much for watching as always. Hopefully October will be a better month for us all if you also did not have the best time this month. And yeah, thank you so much for watching as always, and I will see you very soon with another video. Bye.